Okay, so, oh my goodness, welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you so much. I have special friends, of course, my ethical members, and special friends who have come, and also on Zoom. I have a lot of kindred spirits. Some of my clients are here. Um, and one particular kindred spirit, which is the camp that I go to every year in the northern Berkshires, who lives in Netherlands. The Netherlands is here with us. My sister should be here from Ecuador. I don't see her on the screen, but I'm just happy that people took the time and trouble to listen to my talk on recovery this morning. So, we have at the Ethical Society, we have meetings about meetings. So every year when we have a meeting for our platforms, uh, we say, we want more of real life ethics. We don't want all this esoteric theological things about how ethics should be. And we want everyday ethical struggles. So here I am, everyday ethical struggles. Um, so, how can I have been an addict most of my life and be a member of the Ethical Humanist Society for about 50 years? And that's a conundrum, isn't it? That's a dilemma. Because the nature of being an addict is that your behavior is unethical, right? You don't care about others, do self-absorbing things, destructive to the self. The other day when I was talking about my talk to a friend who I've only known about 7 years, her name is Joan, and she's listening, and she said, "Duffy, you're an addict?" I said, "Yeah, I'm an addict." I'm an addict in recovery. And what does that mean? So, how is it relevant to you guys who are not addicts, of course? I was very surprised to realize that when I told people I was giving a talk on addiction, a lot of them kind of shied away, like, oh, that's those people, that's those people. And in reality, I just want you to get a sense of how relevant this subject could be for all of us. Because the nature of an addiction is that it is a temporary relief on the outside from a great deal of emotional pain. A great deal of emotional pain. So it's not only an emotional relief, but it also can give pleasure. Of course, the problem is it's exponentially worse when someone keeps going and actually their brain structure changes, and so it makes it that much more difficult. So the things that we do to relieve ourselves can also be very harmful. Now, addiction is very complex. It's extremely complex. And so I want to just give you a spectrum of what that can be. And I have a handout for you after the talk on something called soft addictions. So we think of addiction like substance abuse. I'll put something in my arm. But really, an addiction is any activity that is taken beyond the line. Any activity where we go overboard. So it could be shopping, of course, eating, gambling, Facebook, even reading erudite books, crossword puzzles, anything that causes a person to say, I don't want to do anything else but this crossword puzzle. I'm going to sit here, or I'm going to sit here in this chair and read all day. So my spouse I will ignore my spouse. I won't commune with him or her. I will just read all day, but that's okay. So these are what Judith Wright calls soft addictions, everyday activities. Now, it doesn't mean that we can't just kick back at times and say, I don't care about anything. I just want to binge watch. And I'll just kick up my heels and I'll just relax, and that's okay. And it is okay. It absolutely is okay. About 20 years ago, there was an article in Scientific American on TV addiction. And at that time, nobody was talking about it. Nobody. I started talking about TV addiction because I was an addict. I provided my, I comforted myself with, I'm watching Masterpiece Theater, so it's okay. I'm not wasting my time. But I did use television a lot. And the other things that I've used in my life have been mostly food and alcohol. So that's my secret, which is now no longer a secret. And by the way, since I'm going to be talking about my relationship to 12-step programs and my membership in 12-step programs, I want to just ask the 12-steppers who are listening to forgive me, because we have an 11th tradition in AA and the other anonymous programs that says we will not speak at the level of press, radio, television. And when I prepared this talk 2.5 years ago, the world was different. It was COVID, before COVID, and there was no Zoom. So what I did was, because I'm talking about ethics and addiction, I better make sure that this is okay. So I looked up, how does the 12th tradition, where you don't speak about yourself, because the whole idea is to stay anonymous at the level of press, radio, screen, all of that, coincide with me speaking to a Zoom audience? And what it said specifically was that Zoom blurs the lines between the public and the private. And so it's up to the personal discretion of the addict or member to break their own anonymity. So I'm breaking my anonymity. I'm making that decision. It was interesting preparing this talk because I went through various vignettes in my life and as highlights of how I can explain myself. And my first memory is I was about 8 years old, maybe 9, and I was allowed to walk across the big street. And on the other side of the big street was a candy store. So I was very lonely between school and dinner. My sisters were off playing with each other. They were closer in age. I kind of lorded it over them, so they went off on their own. My parents were doing who knows what. But I would spend my allowance, which was contraband, my contraband allowance and money that my grandmother had given me under the table. Don't tell your parents. And I would use that money to buy my chocolate bars. And that's what I did. So I would sit on the stoop in between those times, eating my chocolate bars to my heart's content. Now, when we look at addiction, we say that it's biological, it's psychological, and I would also widen the lens to say it is societal. So if it's a biological, psychological model, why me? Why did I choose chocolate bars? One other sister was an overeater, and my other sister was not. So the whole biological part, and I will say, well, Gabor Mate, who is a major leader in the field of addiction, says that genetics is not true. It's all environmental. I am not interested in that. The jury is out. I could care less. The idea that an alcoholic has a disease is very appealing to me, because what I did when I finally got to my first AA meeting, which was much later than when I was 8, is I felt a whole shroud of shame just drop from my shoulders when I finally said, I am an alcoholic. Because unlike labeling theory, where you don't want to give yourself a bad label and it'll work against you, this declaration of being an alcoholic means that one is repentant. So to redeem myself, I am an alcoholic, but I am interested in recovery. So just to say that my parents were very young. My father was an alcoholic. My mother was a codependent and a closet alcoholic. And they had a very distressed relationship. They were always at each other in a kind of love-hate relationship. So there I was, and it never occurred to me to tell my parents, you know, I'm lonely, so I'm eating chocolate bars after school. Never occurred to me. Of course, I got the money under the table, so I couldn't tell my parents that my grandmother was giving me money that I was buying chocolate bars with, because then she'd figure out a way for me not to do that. So I learned how to be a secret addict. I was a secret addict, as most addicts are. I didn't tell them. Now, here I was a kid wanting sweets all the time. I'm 12 years old, and I go on my first diet. And most of you are too young or never heard of it, but the first diet drink was called Metrical. If anybody remembers, Metrical. Well, when it was the first one, and it was god-awful. I mean, it tasted so bad. And so what I would do on my lunch hour is I would go into the bathroom and hold my nose to drink the Metrical. So a lot of unpleasantness around the whole dieting, binging, whole thing that so many people get into, more so women than men. And I met another very important thing that caused me to feel much more aware of my own family situation was I had befriended my social studies teacher, and I was so lonely as a kid, I would go and talk to her when she was on cafeteria duty, and one day I said to her, you know, I'm flunking algebra, and I can't flunk algebra because I'm a Regents, college-bound person, so, and it's impossible to flunk algebra, but I don't understand it at all. And she said, I don't remember algebra, but I'm going to relearn it so I can teach you. And she devoted 3 afternoons a week relearning and teaching me algebra. Now, why do I bring up Miss Campa? I bring her up because it was the first time an adult ever talked to me in a easygoing, civil, conversational way. I had not realized how high drama my family was until I could speak to an adult who would speak to me as an equal human being, even though I was like, 13, 14. It was so incredibly illuminating for me. So I'm going to fast forward to getting married, and I married at 18 to get out of my house, and I married someone just to get out of the house, and after the wedding ceremony, I started to cry. And anybody would say, oh, these are tears of joy. In reality, they were tears of relief because my father couldn't hit me anymore. So that was how I got married. Well, guess what? It was not a great marriage. And by the age of 20, I developed claustrophobia. And I went to see the late, great Dr. Maida Steiner, who had fled from Hitler. And she had an office that was rectangular shaped, a couch on one side of the desk, and 2 chairs facing each other. She sat me down, and before she sat down, she took a drape that was over the door, the color of a womb, deep red, and she pulled it across the door, assuring me this would keep the sound out. Nobody could hear us. And then she sat down and she looked at me with the kindest eyes I had ever seen, and she said simply, "What's wrong?" And I said, "Well, nothing is wrong. It's just that and I started to sob, and I could not. I didn't abate sobbing for quite some while, and she just kept looking at me with those kind eyes. And then she said 2 more words. She said, "Forgive yourself." I said, "I can't." And with that, I started sobbing again. And at the time, I had no clue why I couldn't forgive myself. I had no sense of reference, but it was my first immediate answer. Well, she helped me get over my claustrophobia in 3 weeks because she said it wasn't elevators and subways I was afraid of being trapped in. It was my own life. I had no marketable skills whatsoever. I had flunked out of college. So I got the courage up at the age of 21 to divorce him and move out to Nassau County to start Nassau Community College. I lived in a furnished room. I waited on tables to support myself, and that's where I came to ethical. And as Arthur remembers, I didn't know you remembered me that first time, but your talk was on the 27 Club, Janis Joplin, Richie Hendricks, who's the third? Jim Morrison, all died at 27 of drug overdose. And he played their songs during the platform. So I said, "I'm here, I'm home, this is great." Woo, woo, woo. So, honey, I need a glass of water, please. So, Tina's getting it, it's okay. Okay, so ethical felt like my family because I could trust people here. I could trust people that they would be ethical, meaning they would be kind and good and not mean and cruel and not histrionic. Thank you. Whoops, it's okay. Okay. So I felt good about that part, but what I didn't like is that I was betwixt and between. Everybody was much older than me, and then there were the kids, the high school kids who were younger, and I didn't have a place quite. Arthur found me a place. He asked me to be in charge of the local high school, our high school youth group. So I found a place, and I worked with the teenagers, and I again was betwixt and between, which is almost always where I feel I am, betwixt and between. Well, Lynn and I became fast friends, and I shared with Lynn my compulsive overeating, and she said, "Well, there's somebody in society who's a member of Overeaters Anonymous." And I said, "Wow, really?" And I called her. Her first name was Rhoda. Let's call her Rhoda W. And she invited me over. I went to her house. And every morning I would wake up and I would say, am I going to eat this morning, or am I going to eat junk food? I would decide I'm not eating or I'm eating junk food. That was one of the mornings I was not eating. So when I arrived at her house around noon, she said, "Have you eaten today?" I said, "Well, no." She said, "How is it possible you haven't eaten? It's 12 o'clock. She instantly made me a breakfast of 2 scrambled eggs, and spinach. And I have to tell you guys, that was the most wonderful meal I can remember. It was so heavenly because it was given by such a loving person. So, joined an anonymous group, Overeaters Anonymous. It turned out to be a real mixed bag because one was not allowed to have milk in their coffee between meals because milk was a food and you weren't supposed to eat in between meals. I couldn't drink black coffee. So I became known as a problem baby. That's what they called newcomers in OA, not newcomers, but babies. I was a problem baby. Oh, the worst. It was like, And then when I finally got 30 days of abstinence from sugar and wheat and flour, you had to do that to step up to become a sponsor, which is a very good thing. She introduced me to the whole group as a foster baby because I had gone from one sponsor to another. And they said, I don't know what to do with her. Can you take her? I'll take her. So she's my foster baby. Well, I drove home that night and I stopped off and I bought a half a gallon of ice cream. So there was my dieting, binging thing. And so basically, just a couple of highlights I see was, I'm spending a lot of time on my earlier life. When I finally found adult children of alcoholics, it was incredibly important to me because I was drowning in self-hatred and I kept blaming myself. Why can't you? Why can't you? Why can't you do this and eat normally and be a normal weight? Hating myself so much. And then I read what's called the laundry list for adult children of alcoholics. And I have copies of it for you in the back. Okay? And why I think it's important is that we first understood it was alcoholism that was the problem. Then we knew that it's adult children from any kind of dysfunctional family. And when you look at how a child grows up in a family that doesn't work, that it's not working well together, unfortunately, that's like 70 to 96% of the population. 70 to 96% of the population. So when I read that laundry list and I saw things like constantly seeks approval, is impulsive, has trouble with intimate relationships, on and on, I said, oh my God, I'm not alone. I'm not alone. And so I wanted so much to deal with my irregular eating and my drinking. I actually did my doctoral dissertation on food and addiction and studied 2 different groups about how each group, Fat is a Feminist Issue and Overeaters Anonymous, how they managed to look at weight and overeating and all of that. And even then, it didn't help. Even then, nothing helped. Nothing helped. I finally found something called Recovery Camp at the age of 48, which was for people in recovery, and I went there, and what made it so important to me was that most everyone there was an alcoholic in recovery. And they were happy. They were actually happy. They were playing, they were frivolous, they were joking. And I never knew anything like that. I only knew my father he was either in AA or out of AA. And he was unhappy wherever he was. So when he wasn't drinking, he'd be miserable, he'd hit me for no reason, and he was always unhappy. So the whole idea of seeing an alcoholic in recovery and being joyful was incredible to me. So the following year, I joined AA. And it took me a lot. And as soon as I joined AA, I felt a sense of real family. So I just want to say to you that there is so much shame in being an addict. And yet we are called a nation of addicts. That a lot of people are secret addicts. And part of this is we have a very individualistic culture. We're taught, do it on your own, you don't need anyone. And then we have a consumer society. Margaret Mead identified America as a lack of community. We're feeling phobic, we're afraid of feelings. You just put all that together and you get a very bad mixture. And so the shame prevents people from sharing, except if you go to an anonymous group. Takes one to know one. And that's where the health and the healing is. So it was very good for me to start looking at myself and my own sense of shame and to forgive myself. And that's where the shroud of shame comes in and drops off my shoulders. So I wrote The Banyan Tree as a result of wanting to express to people support, needing support. Now, I had never seen a banyan tree until I was an adult because they're tropical trees. And when I studied for my 3-year Gestalt certification, one of the things we had to do was to give a 3-hour symposium on something related to Gestalt therapy. And Fritz Perls, who and his wife, who dealt with the Holocaust, figured out the best thing to do is to be self-supporting, not to count on anybody else, and take care of yourself. And I knew that wasn't right because I was a member of 12-step groups, and we all needed support together. So my version of self-support is far from self-sufficiency. It has to do with reaching out and believing that there are real and vital resources out there. It's just reaching out and telling your truth and daring to connect. And so the banyan tree is about, the banyan can be as big as 2 blocks, because when it has its branches, it drops roots, and the roots go into the ground and stabilize those branches so it can go far and wide. And that's why I invite you to think about how much support do you get? How much support do you ask for? How for you to be able to go far and wide? And just to demonstrate for a moment, if you could just be aware of your feet on the ground, just feel your rootedness, fear on the ground. And I'd like you to notice the chair. I'd like you to notice how you're sitting on the chair. And just notice that this chair is fully supporting your body. And your body is, and the chair is being supported by the floor, which is being supported by Mother Earth. So just take a moment and notice what it's like to give yourself over completely to support. I give myself over completely to that support of that chair. And notice what happens to your muscles when you do that. Notice what happens to your muscles. Can anybody just call out and notice anything that happens to your muscles? Yeah. Relaxing, tilted, and surrender, did you say? Yes. Thank you. Anybody else feel more relaxed? So, yeah. So, want to end with a poem, which I cannot believe I don't have. How is that possible? I don't have it. Oh my God, my grand finale. Yes, yes. But it was basically called Life Wish, Life Wish, and the idea of wholesome spirit. Wholesome spirit, please just notice I'm here and that I am happy being alive, and I know that I am no better or no worse than any other body, and I rest in peace inside of me, knowing my place in the world, that I'm okay, I deserve to take up space. I live here on the planet. So wholesome spirit, I am at your service.